Okay, hello everyone. No, I'll be switching to a video.
Oh, okay.
So then I'll full screen this. So I work in natural language processing on sign language. So that makes me a computer scientist and a linguist, but not a grapholinguist, if that's the term. Just to color my presentation. And so there will be one, I think I limited the number of slides, computer science leaning slides to one. But I'll need some of that background. So anyway, this is going to be about representing sign language and doing so graphically. So before I even do slide stuff, I wanted to show a video of sign language because I don't know how literate. Tell me, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, and I'm going to have to make this switching short because the time is short. So my question here is only to, my point is to illustrate how multilinear sign languages, they're oral languages, they have no written form, etc. I think I can skip over this kind of trivial stuff for such an educated audience. But my question is here, what is the very first thing she does? So no time to be interactive here, unfortunately. So most people will say, that's the first time she does. The answer I want to point out here, the true answer is, she's not even done the sign yet. The first thing she does is look to her right in the signing space, and she's turned her shoulder line to the right. And then she signs something that means country, right? And then something that is a sign for Iraq, so a country. What is she doing next? She's not started the next sign, if I'm going sequence. She's already turned her shoulder line back, looked to the left and back to the camera. And now she's going to sign person. Right, keep that in mind. That was what I wanted to show, because I could have told you about it, but I think it's better to show it. Shall I go F5, is it? No. Just to full screen this if I can, if there's a button somewhere. Full screen, just to switch to slide mode. Thank you. It must be short for that. Yeah. All right, so the background is sign language, few properties. I've shown an example. AZVD, this is underground stuff. It's not at all something that comes from the lab. It looks like that. It's just a graphical representation, and that's what I'm proposing we explore today. But I need to explain to you how this was built, what the methodology was to come up with this, and then explore the opportunity of using this as a proxy for writing, because there is none. I mean, there is no writing system for signing. All right. That means we're able to animate that. That's also kind of a teasing point for me. Okay, the roots for this are these two roots, and I'll be having the two subsequent slides are going to be about that. Spontaneous VD, verbalizing diagrams. That's my term for it. I'm going to show some. AZ, a formal model to represent sign language. So one slide on each. Of course, it's hard to do, so they're a bit stuffed, but it's also because it's full of pictures. Spontaneous, so what I call verbalizing diagrams are what people spontaneously draw or write. I mean, there's a bit of both. I mean, there is text in there, sometimes full of it, but I've chosen the most pretty looking ones. What they do spontaneously when they want to capture their language, an utterance, even a whole speech on paper. So it's not writing, but this is the kind of stuff we get. It's not a system, like this is all freehand drawing, and it's mostly meant for the people to read the drawings themselves and not to communicate to others. So this is not, I'm not claiming this is anything like a writing system, not even a system at all. But the scientist in me, when I collected these things, could not help but spot some regularities in them. So this is, to me, was a window onto how people would, you know, on their intuition of how the cogs of their language and how it works. So a few regularities, 4 instances here of the same pattern. Okay, every time it means, this means Fidel Castro is well. So this is actually, and there's a recursive regularity here. It's the health of Fidel Castro is good. For those who can think ahead. This is, the line is nice. This is cancer. What is cancer? Cancer is what? Yeah. So, okay, one type of regularity. We also got, I've also got a lot of horizontal lines. This is not so horizontal, but still it's the same kind of line in terms of meaning and in terms of what is then signed when the diagram is read. Perhaps less morphosyntactically, if I can afford that term here. More sort of what do we get to see in the diagrams? We see more these two, for example, this is the contrast. These two are very, so I'm going to still use that term for this case, logographic, right? I did adopt and appreciate Terry's definition of morphographic, and I'll be using it in later slides, but I didn't think it applied here, so I kept the previous one. You'll tell me if I'm right. So because this means justice, this is just a person, obviously nothing phonographic there. However, this is phonographic. So we do see a bit of phonography in there. This stands for this sign, obviously a flat hand and a thumb up here, and that is a difficult thing to capture in terms of meaning. This means, at least in the drawing, this means like the chief, most important or prominent thing or person. So it's the notion of being superior or right, you know, so meaning, I don't know how you capture that in a drawing, and this is a salient form that you can easily draw. So there's kind of sometimes they resort to phonography. All right, so this notation is kind of useless on this slide, but to contrast with later ones, I'm introducing it here. Not systematic, is sign language specific, and this is supposed to be a tilde. Is it? If it's not a system, I don't think we can call it adopted, but it's in practice. Right, so recurrent patterns, we've talked about this, and right, I need to move on anyway. AZ now, this is the formal, this is the computer science stuff. The purpose of that was to have a formal, linguistically relevant input to be able to drive avatars. And so this is not to be meant to be read by humans. It's entirely built on the duality between form and meaning, so you're used to that. By form, I mean articulated form, and this doesn't mean graphical, as opposed to what you've been using. This means articulated as in, I suppose, the phonetics, I suppose, and the interpreted meaning. We built production rules. A production rule is something that that encodes a systematic mapping between a meaning and a form. So we have examples here. For example, nice or kind is the meaning, produces this form. I've only put the diagram here, but I could have drawn a timeline saying you start here and put articulatory constraints and stuff. And so you start here, you brush down your cheek this way. Right, here's a most simple fixed form production rule. Country that we've seen earlier is also a meaningful mapping. But we have optional parameters. We can relocate the country. We can also play on its size because this is kind of iconic of the contour, right? You don't have to, but you can. Indeed, it's very not at all frequently done, but you could. Anyway, so this is only to introduce parameters. You can do big countries. So the form will depend will produce the meaning, but will depend on some parameters, in this case, a point and a size, so implemented as a numerical value. Right, building up to more interesting stuff. Remember this thing I said about looking right first? That is also something that is also meaningful, produces a systematic form, hence gets a encoded into by a production rule. So about ref is, I'm saying something about a reference, which comes in the form of a point. So it takes a point to the parameter, this time not optional, and an information, whatever that is. And that is, could be any signed utterance, right? So there's a recursive application of rules there. What that generates, so here's a timeline with blocks inside, and every block is a piece of the signing activity that I'm synchronizing on the timeline. That first little block there, that's the eye gaze towards the point. So the first thing I need to do is to look at the point. Then we have the torso that is gradually turning towards that point as well. And synchronized in this way, so starting last between the three blocks, we get the information in the example I showed was country Iraq. That was the information about the point. So we're kind of setting the Iraq country on the right-hand side. And then she placed a person on the left, and that allows in sign language to then say, I haven't shown it that far, but then she says that person is hostage, but in Iraq, so bringing to the right. That was the text. So there's some form of spatial agreement there with the term Iraq never repeated, just referencing the point. Okay, let me talk about this example here. Information about, this is also a meaning. You take two things and you say info about the topic. What that produces is a one after the other, laying out the blocks. We've got the topic first, slight little hold, control duration, separation here of duration, so you also control rhythm. The information comes next, another hold, and an eye blink. So the notion of sequence is not sufficient. What we get here is a controlled rhythm and laying out things on a timeline. Notice nothing here is deemed syntactic or lexical or anything like that. We can have one parameter rules like called intersubjectivity. So this means everybody generally agrees that sig is anything signed. This synchronizes a lip pout in front, like ahead of starting a few frames ahead of the sig. Right, the point of all this is that you can then nest things in one another and build expressions like that, intersubjectivity with nice kind as the sig, and this means, yeah, everybody agrees that nice. And that produces forms. That's what I'm getting at, is that all of this, this is semantically compositional, but determines the form, so I can drive an avatar. And in fact, we do, and I think I'm running out of time. I'll do this as a bonus at the end, but I can show the actual rendering with the eye gaze first. And so determines forms is in boldface here, because you know a writing system that we How did we, from these two basics, how do I build AZVD? Keep form determinism, because that felt like that had power. So I'm gonna want to build a function from a set of graphical possibilities to AZ, because AZ I know determines the forms. Then for adoptability, for humans to be able to use it, incorporate any systematic regularity I found in what people already spontaneously do in the system, because presumably if there's any kind of graphical edition possible, later editing possible, then I'd want to adopt anything that they already do, not have them learn any sort of new system. For coverage, what I want is to create a layout for every unaccounted production rule. So that means anything not, so we have examples here of things I can borrow. Sun, for example, they all draw a sun. They don't do anything else. They won't go phonographic for that. That corresponds to a production rule, sun. Well, I've translated the names, but obviously sun, there's that form. That equal layout, remember? This directly corresponds to the info about rule I showed you. X is, or at least Y is information about X. And this is that template expression. The horizontal bar we saw, also we have a rule for that directly in AZ that directly corresponds, called in context. First one is the context, second is the process. Process is to be understood in the context of X. More elaborate templates when we have an opposition between two things, X and Y here. We place X on the left, just like I demonstrated we could, place Y on the right, and that will serve as a context for the subsequent stuff. But there's only a few, I mean, there's quite a few, but only a few examples of these. That doesn't give us coverage of everything AZ can do. But I don't want to lose coverage, so that's what I'm saying here. Creating a layout for every unaccounted production rule. So basically taking all of the unaccounted production rules that I've had and just giving it arbitrary or kickstart kind of a graphical layout. There, so for example, that will be the one about ref point, and that contains the whole information. So for the math people out there, we want to do a surjective function, not necessarily injective. We don't want a red dot, and we allow several arrows to go to the same thing. Because sometimes you have variants, and so that they point to the same expression. So that's what we get. This is country Iraq on the left. So it's readable. At least I think it's a decent. Yeah, that determines this expression, and that determines the force to produce. This is what I'm using the morphographic term, because we do have a predominantly morphographic symbol set because we've used the ones they would use. That's to answer a reviewer, I think, an idea of the count. Obviously, the vocabulary of Vicon is going to be that of the vocabulary of little language. So that's going to be a very kind of a Chinese writing system type where you have many symbols. Right? And they could be phonographic sometimes. But otherwise, the other combining rules will be about 25 unary. It's the order of magnitude because it kind of fluctuates. 25 unary and 25 binary. And so that's not too many for a system. So since it determines forms, looks scriptable, readable. This is the whole, by the way, this is the whole example of the video, and that was 30 seconds long of the whole thing. That was also to answer, I think, a kind of a side note. Contrast with other systems. You've seen some stuff like this, I think, earlier. Maybe not. Maybe it was never shown. It was mentioned. Sign writing is here. That was shown earlier. The Stokey notation and other systems. So these are the propositions that have been out there. Some for a while, some for a long while, some are quite unknown otherwise. These are systematic. I mean, the claim is that every same thing will be represented in the same way. They are sign language specific, but not adopted. They're all linear systems, so I can see that. Okay, the time flag is coming up. So I'll skip over this, but we can, so the interesting stuff I think is here, mostly linear, although some mix at some point, fully phonographic as much as can be. These are, okay, the writing systems you know, usually an imbalanced mix of phono and morpho. This is too, but that's not linear. Okay, I'll let questions come back to this if it's important. So 2 problems, and that will be the end of, could be the end of the talk. So the problem with this is that what we get is, I wanted to point this out. It's a hierarchical system, meaning it's recursive, a recursive 2D layout. So this is not completely alien in terms of script. This is to me very close to the math script, because every box can contain other boxes, and you just gradually build up the whole thing. So we have so that's the starting point here. We have a fully hierarchical system, but what do we do if we want to write a whole book? Some form of sequencing will be needed. We don't want to write Harry Potter on a sheet of paper that, you know, would need more than the room to fit. And so a good use case for that is to imagine what would we want for subtitling, because that will be kind of tied to real time, and you've got these things popping up and off, and so these are acceptable units and will force serialization. Doing this on a story sort of spontaneously makes us break at these horizontal lines, and sometimes at other info abouts which are these points, and you can kind of see it already separated this way. So if we do that, we get units that are about this size, which is more to the level of 1 or 2 sentences than a word or a phoneme. So this is just now for discussion, because I don't know what that means in the end. So all we lose is the hierarchy between these big separations, but we don't really care. Last point, by construction, I said this was going to be a surjection and not necessarily an injection. Actually, I think the future might want to reverse this for several reasons. So in the end, maybe we don't want a surjection, meaning we might want to lose some of this, because who says all of this is actually necessary? But the fact that you can nest any rule in any rule in terms of grammar in sign language is not true. You probably, I mean, the expressions you build, they're constrained by more than just what is what you can imagine in terms of computer science typing of values. No, there's also stuff that you will never will be accepted linguistically. So this definitely should be eventually allowed. I just don't know. I mean, we don't know enough of sign language to know what to allow to not be able to produce. Also, maybe we do want an injection, because if this is ever adopted as a writing system, I suppose you would call that standardization. Would you want 3 ways of writing the same thing? Maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe it's part of an evolution of writing to standardize these things, so you only want one antecedent for every form. So yeah, that's my final slide. And I can just leave it hang. Just want to say that we did build an editor for this. Kind of integrate this. I can show a video that demos it. And the point of that will be to maybe put this in the hands of users and try to set up an interactive loop where we can build on, incorporate the way that people distort the system or feedback on it. Right, that's about most of what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
I have a question for you. I can use the time for one question. to show the video with the demo, but yeah.
It's up to you.
Or I can just leave it run.
Actually, we can
While you-
talk during the lunch and use some time
Well,
to
yeah, okay.
show everyone, also everyone who are so patient online with me.
There you go. Here's just the demo. And I know, I mean, is it running?
On the left.
Yeah, here. So this is just dropping stuff on the canvas here, and you see that automatically it synchronizes with the AZ expression that it generates. And so I'll just skip forward. So this is not necessarily practical. I mean, this is like a first shot at being able to edit these things. And if I just skip forward, maybe we build a better. So we have on the left country Iraq. So this is the shortened version. On the right, France. This is context for a person incidentally hostage on the right, returning from right to left. And so that button's been clicked. This is running, and we get an avatar that produces it. And I'm not sure it's looping, and if it does, it's going to go all the way back. But yeah, you'll have a look closely, and you'll see that the eye gaze is there. That avatar, by the way, was programmed with a collaboration with Chicago colleague, DePaul University. Oh, shall I take a question, sir? Yeah, no questions?
It's going to be really quick. I'm just curious about the syntax of AZ.
Yeah.
I seem to have recognized bits from this syntax, like keywords and quote symbols and stuff like that, but probably not exactly.
Lisp.
Lisp syntax.
No, you recognize Lisp by an overwhelming flooding of parentheses. There are none in here. This is more Pythonic because what does the nesting is the indentation.
Okay, it's indentation.
But it is, it is a functional language, if you know what the,
Yeah,
so
sure.
functions are themselves values. It's true in AZ.
Okay.
That would be one thing, yeah.
Okay, well, column stuff is a list.
That means applying a function. This is AZ specific. Is that it?
I have
So,
one,
yeah.
actually, at the heuristic. How could it be readable?
How could it be readable?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not showing.
Or at least in which language?
This is, I mean, in theory, so I'd like to, oh, there it is. If you know what these things stand for, is it that? Yeah, that's that. And I've got James Meyer on top of it. So, for example, here, if you know that this means last Saturday, there's an arrow here. Then you just produce the sign. This determines the form. You can completely learn how to read this.
Then you can read it in more than one language.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
You know, because in hieroglyphs it could be like this, ancient ones.
So this completely determines a sign language form and one sign language form. The thing is that so this is LSF, but the only reason it's LSF is that it's got the rule set emerged from what you want to produce in LSF. Thing is, all sign languages kind of work the same, in fact, and so you could argue, even at least at this level, you could argue they're all the same dialects of a same system, because these will probably, I'm not saying, I mean, technically I'm speculating here, but the intuition in the field, and in fact, it's been kind of, I mean, that avatar you saw, changing just the lexical stuff you do get a perfectly acceptable production in any other language. Just adjusting for these. So you could say, yeah, let's keep the icons. Just say they hide a different form.
Mhm.
But then the phonographic ones will not be acceptable.
Mhm.
For example, because that, I mean, the meaning of that in another sign language will be
Mhm.
different. But anything non-phonographic, which is the majority,
Mhm.
and anything combining, which is
Exactly.
what they all share,
Mhm.
probably is the same. Yeah.
Yeah, all
But that would have to be tested.
indexicality, so to speak.
You mean giving
Yeah,
assigning
the
points in
phonographic,
space?
yes.
That's the same in all sign languages, of course.
So let's talk later. Okay, thank you.